The storm raged fiercely, its howling winds whipping the sea into a frenzy. Waves crashed against the hull of the small ship, threatening to swallow it whole. Henry Tudor, barely 14 years old, clung to the mast, his knuckles white and his face pale. Beside him, his uncle Jasper Tudor shouted orders to the crew, his voice barely audible over the roar of the tempest. "Hold steady," Jasper bellowed, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We cannot afford to lose our way now." Henry's stomach churned, not just from the violent rocking of the ship, but from the weight of their flight. They were fugitives, hunted by the Yorkist king, Edward IV, who had crushed the Lancastrian cause at the Battle of Tewkesbury. Henry's father, Edmund Tudor, was long dead, and his mother, Margaret Beaufort, had been forced to submit to the Yorkist regime. Henry was the last hope of the House of Lancaster, and his survival was a miracle in itself. As the ship battled the storm, Henry's mind drifted to the chaos they had left behind. The Wars of the Roses had torn England apart, pitting cousin against cousin, brother against brother. The Lancastrians had been defeated, their leaders slaughtered or exiled. Henry had been too young to fight, but his bloodline made him a target. The Yorkists would not rest until every threat to their throne was eliminated. The storm began to subside as dawn broke, revealing the rugged coastline of Brittany. Henry's heart lifted at the sight. They had made it, for now they were safe. Duke Francis II of Brittany welcomed the Tudors with cautious hospitality. The Duke was a shrewd ruler, well aware of the value of his new guests. Henry and Jasper were given quarters in the imposing Chateau de l'Hermine, where they were treated with respect but kept under close watch. "You are welcome here," Duke Francis said, his tone measured, "but you must understand that your presence complicates matters. Edward of England will not be pleased to know I harbour his enemies." Jasper bowed his head. "We are grateful for your protection, your grace. We ask only for refuge until the time is right to reclaim what is ours." Henry remained silent, his young face betraying none of the turmoil within. He knew they were pawns in a larger game, their fate tied to the shifting alliances of Europe. But he also knew that survival was the first step toward victory. Over the next few years, Henry grew into a young man under Jasper's guidance. He studied politics, warfare, and diplomacy, learning the skills he would need to navigate the treacherous world of court intrigue. But despite the relative safety of Brittany, the threat of the Yorkists loomed large. In England, Edward IV's reign brought a fragile peace. The Yorkist king was a charismatic and capable ruler, but his brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, watched with a calculating gaze. Richard was ambitious, and he saw Henry Tudor as a lingering threat to the Yorkist dynasty. "The boy is a danger," Richard said to Edward during a council meeting. "As long as he lives, the Lancastrians will rally around him. We must eliminate him." Edward sighed, his expression weary. "Henry Tudor is a child, Richard. He poses no immediate threat. Let him rot in exile." But Richard was not satisfied. He dispatched spies to Brittany, tasked with capturing Henry and bringing him to England. The Yorkist agents arrived at Duke Francis's court, their presence sending a ripple of tension through the castle. "Your Grace," the lead envoy said, bowing before Duke Francis, "King Edward demands the surrender of Henry Tudor. He is a traitor to the crown and must face justice." Duke Francis hesitated, his mind racing. Handing Henry over would please Edward and secure his alliance, but it would also remove a valuable bargaining chip. Keeping Henry risked angering the Yorkists, but it could prove useful in the future. "I will consider your request," Duke Francis said finally, "but for now, Henry Tudor remains under my protection." The envoy's eyes narrowed, but he bowed again and withdrew. Henry, who had been eavesdropping on the conversation, felt a chill run down his spine. He knew his life hung by a thread. If Duke Francis decided to hand him over, there would be no escape. That night, Henry sought out Jasper in their chambers. "Uncle, we cannot stay here," he said, his voice low but urgent. "The Yorkists will not stop until they have me. We must leave Brittany." Jasper frowned, his expression grave. "Where would we go, Henry? We have no allies, no army. Our only hope is to bide our time and wait for the right moment. And if that moment never comes," Henry countered, "we cannot rely on Duke Francis's goodwill forever. We must take our fate into our own hands." Jasper studied his nephew, seeing the determination in his eyes. Henry was no longer a boy. He was a young man with a fire in his heart and a hunger for justice. "Very well," Jasper said finally. "We will make plans to leave, but we must be careful. One misstep and we are lost." As the days passed, Henry and Jasper began to quietly prepare for their escape. They gathered supplies, forged alliances with sympathetic nobles, and kept a close eye on Duke Francis's movements. But the Yorkist spies were watching too, and the net around them was tightening. One evening, as Henry walked the castle grounds, he noticed a shadow following him. He quickened his pace, his heart pounding. The shadow drew closer, and Henry realized he was out of time. He broke into a run, darting through the narrow streets of the town outside the castle. The spy gave chase, voice, his footsteps echoing in the night. Henry's mind raced as he searched for a way to escape. Rounding a corner, he spotted a group of merchants loading goods onto a cart. Without hesitation, he slipped into the back of the cart and hid beneath a pile of sacks. The spy ran past, cursing under his breath. Henry stayed hidden until the cart began to move, carrying him away from the town and toward the coast. He knew this was his chance. He would not wait for the Yorkists to come for him. He would take control of his destiny. As the cart rumbled into the night, Henry clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. The battle for survival was far from over, and he was ready to fight. The cart rattled along the rough coastal road, its wooden wheels creaking under the weight of the goods it carried. Henry Tudor lay hidden beneath a pile of sacks, his heart pounding as he listened for any sign of pursuit. The night was dark, the moon obscured by thick clouds, and the only sounds were the rhythmic clopping of the horses' hooves and the distant crash of waves against the shore. Henry's mind raced. He had escaped the immediate danger, but he knew the Yorkist spies would not give up so easily. He needed to find Jasper and get as far from Brittany as possible. But where could they go? They had no allies, no army, and no safe haven. The cart came to a sudden halt, jolting Henry from his thoughts. He heard the driver exchange words with someone, then the cart began to move again, this time turning onto a narrower path. Henry risked peeking out from beneath the sacks and saw that they were approaching a small fishing village. The smell of salt and seaweed filled the air, and the faint glow of lanterns illuminated the outlines of cottages and boats. When the cart finally stopped, Henry waited until the driver had moved away before slipping out and crouching in the shadows. He scanned the area, looking for any sign of Jasper or a place to hide. His eyes fell on a small inn at the edge of the village, its windows glowing warmly. Taking a deep breath, Henry crept toward the inn, keeping to the shadows. He slipped inside through the back door and found himself in a cramped kitchen. The innkeeper, a stout woman with a kind face, was stirring a pot over the fire. She looked up in surprise as Henry stepped into the light. "Who are you, boy?" she asked, her voice sharp but not unkind. I need help," Henry stammered. "My uncle and I are in danger. We must leave Brittany." The innkeeper studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Wait here," she said, disappearing into the main room of the inn. She returned moments later with Jasper, who looked both relieved and exasperated to see Henry. "You foolish boy," Jasper said, pulling Henry into a tight embrace. "You could have been killed." "I had no choice," Henry replied. "The Yorkists are closing in. We cannot stay here." Jasper sighed, his expression grim. "You're right, but we cannot leave without a plan. We need allies, ships and men, and we need them quickly." Over the next few days, Henry and Jasper worked in secret to gather support. The innkeeper, whose name was Marie, proved to be a valuable ally. She had connections with the local fishermen and merchants, many of whom were sympathetic to the Lancastrian cause. "There is a man," Marie told them one evening, "a captain named Guillaume. He has a ship and a crew loyal to Duke Francis, but he has no love for the Yorkists. If you can convince him to help you, he may be your best chance." Henry and Jasper met with Captain Guillaume the following night. The captain was a grizzled man with a weathered face and a no-nonsense demeanor. He listened carefully as Jasper explained their situation. "You ask much," Guillaume said when Jasper had finished. "To defy Duke Francis and risk the wrath of the Yorkists is no small thing. What do you offer in return?" Henry stepped forward, his voice steady. "If you help us, you will have the gratitude of the future king of England, and when the time comes, you will be rewarded beyond measure." Guillaume studied Henry for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well, I will take you to France, but know this, if we are caught, I will not hesitate to abandon you to save my crew." Henry and Jasper agreed, knowing it was the best offer they would get. The journey to France was fraught with danger. The Yorkist spies were still searching for Henry, and the seas were patrolled by English ships. But Guillaume was a skilled captain, and he navigated the treacherous waters with ease. When they finally reached the French coast, Henry felt a surge of hope. France was a powerful kingdom, and its ruler, King Louis XI, was no friend to Edward IV. If they could secure his support, they might have a chance to reclaim the English throne. But gaining an audience with King Louis was no easy task. The French court was a labyrinth of intrigue, and Henry and Jasper were outsiders with little to offer. They spent weeks in the shadows, pleading their case to anyone who would listen. Finally, through a combination of persistence and luck, they managed to secure a meeting with the king. Louis XI, known as the Spider King for his cunning and manipulation, received them in his private chambers. "So," Louis said, his voice dripping with skepticism, "you are the last hope of the House of Lancaster. Tell me, why should I risk my kingdom to help you?" Henry stepped forward, his heart pounding but his voice steady. "Your Majesty, the Yorkists are a threat to us both. Edward IV seeks to expand his influence, and if he succeeds, he will turn his eyes to France. But if you help me reclaim my throne, I will ensure that that England remains a loyal ally to your kingdom. Lewis studied Henry for a long moment, then smiled faintly. You have spirit, young Tudor. Very well, I will give you the support you need, but remember, you owe me a great head. With Lewis's backing, Henry and Jasper began to gather an army. French soldiers, mercenaries, and exiled Lancastrians flocked to their cause, but as their forces grew, so did the tension. The Yorkists were not idle, and they would not let Henry challenge their rule without a fight. One evening, as Henry reviewed maps of England with Jasper and his advisors, a messenger burst into the room. "My lords," the messenger said, breathless, "Edward IV is dead. His brother Richard has seized the throne."